Hello everyone, welcome to this very first deck tech on my channel, and today we're going to talk about Han Green, that I also like to call Solo U-Wing. I hope everybody had a great pre-release weekend, and I'm really excited to deep dive into what is nonetheless my favorite deck in the game, and the deck that I've been enjoying to play the most so far. So Han Green is basically what we call a ramp deck, so a deck that has the possibility to gain extra resources in order to play larger things. So the specificity of Han is that the resource that it allows you to play are mostly temporary resources thanks to his leader's ability, and this allows you to play very large things much earlier than any other deck in the game. And that's a very fun thing to play with. So I'm first going to talk about the leader himself, so then everything makes a little bit more sense. So basically the way things work with Han is that you can use his action to put a card from your hand into play as a resources and ready that resource. And at the start of the next action phase, you have to defeat that resource, a resource you control. So a couple of things to note. So it basically gives you an extra resources that you can use for that turn, and then at the beginning of the next turn you will lose that resources. So it's a temporary resources. The interesting thing to note is that the resource that you defeat, which means that the resource that you put in your discard pile, does not have to be exactly the same one that you've put into play with Han. So that means that you can, let's say you can use Han to resource let's say I don't know, like an expensive card like a Bright Hope in, and then you can decide to put something else in the discard pile that you've resourced earlier. Normally this would not matter, but Han has actually loads of ways to interact with the discard pile, which actually makes it a pretty relevant mechanic for the deck, and pretty interesting in my opinion as well. So Han is typically going to be what I like to call a mid-range deck. So a mid-range deck, if we take our little strategy diagram, is a deck that is sitting between aggro and control. So the idea of an aggro deck is to try to attack an opponent and kill this opponent as quickly as possible. It's aggressive strategy. Control is the opposite of this. You're trying to delay the game until you reach a point where you can basically have an overwhelming advantage because you have a very late game centered deck. So you really try to delay the game, defeat the opponent units, and try to slow down the game as much as possible to reach that late game situation where you're going to be dominant. And then we're not going to focus too much about it because so far we don't have many combo decks in the game, but combo decks are typically a deck that is trying to assemble a combination of cards which is going to give them an overwhelming advantage, or even sometimes even straight up win the game. So here we're talking about Han Green is what we call a mid-range deck, which means that it's a deck that has the ability to become the aggressor or the control deck depending on the situations. So it is more of a control deck than it is of an aggro deck, so it will be on the diagram it will be sitting somewhere in that area, where it's a deck that has really the potential to be both at once. So now that we know what is our overall strategy and that we know about our leader's ability, I'm going to be focusing more on the overall deck. So the way basically Han typically will deploy when you have 6 resources, but because you can use Han's ability on turn 4, so on turn 4 you have 5 resources, you use the ability to get 6 resources, and that allows you to deploy Han. So even though Han technically should deploy on turn 5, he actually deploys on turn 4 if you use Han's ability before you deploy him, which is usually what you want to do. So the great thing about Han is, so obviously his ability allows you to accelerate and play things earlier than what you normally should be able to, but it also costs cards, and obviously you can run out of cards in this game, so you have to be careful to not deploy too many cards, to not use this ability too often. Typically you're going to be using that ability about twice per game is a good number, between twice and 3 times per game. So one of the most common way to use Han's, the key timing in which we usually use Han's ability can be sometimes on turn 1. So as you can see here on this deck list, we're only playing 2 Greedo, 3 Battlefield Marine, 3 Mon Mothma, which are going to be the 8 card that we're happy to play on turn 1. That's not a lot. Usually a deck should be playing between 9 and 12 turn 1 play. So if we don't find a turn 1 play, what we can do, we can use Han's ability on turn 1, and then we can play a 3-drop like Echo Base Defender, a Falcon, or even a Resupply right from turn 1. So this gives us a lot of flexibility. Another typical moment where we can use that card, obviously we can use this card to play any of our card 1 turn earlier, but the other key moment in which we're going to be using Han's ability is going to be on turn 3, when we have 4 resources, on turn 4, when we have 5 resources into play. We're going to be using Han's ability to get 6 resources, deploy Han, and then once Han is deployed, it will basically give us an extra temporary resources on attack. So if we're able to attack with Han, then we go up to 7 resources. So that's 7 resources, while normally we should only have 5. And this allows us to play a 7-drop like U-Wing Reinforcements or Han Solo 2 turn before they should normally be played. And that is incredibly powerful. That's basically the key aspect of this deck. And Han Solo is a 6 health leader, which means that he's relatively difficult to kill before he gets to attack. It's relatively difficult to interact with Han before he gets to attack. Obviously, certain decks can prevent Han from attacking. They can exhaust him, or they can kill him in one shot, but there's only very few cards in the game that can do this. So most of the time you're able to play around this and predict that this can happen to you, and then you can play in consequence of that. But if you know for a fact that there's nothing that can block Solo, then it's a counting up to 7 resources and play that thing's 2 turn earlier. So Han is is in my opinion one of the most difficult deck to play in the entire game, simply because every turn you got almost twice more options than any other deck would have at this point. Because, for example, you're on turn 1, you have the ability to play a turn 2 play like a Battlefield Marine or a Mothma, but you can also go up to going up to 3 resources to play an Echo Base Defender, or a Resupply is also an option available to you. And you have the option like this every single turn, which means it's a very skill-intensive game that gives you a lot of options, which is really good for players who want to challenge themselves and find and always have a way to have an out and have a lot of different lines of play they can follow. It's also a very fun deck to play with because it's a high risk or high reward. Of course, if you are spending an extra card in order to play a card earlier and that card gets dealt with, it's very bad for you. So obviously you have to be very smart about what you're playing against, what are the outs, what are the options that your opponent is going to have to deal with that threat. Is it worth it to play that card earlier if it can be dealt with, and all that interesting calculation. There's a lot of interesting shenanigan as well related to what temporary resources are you going to be placing in your discard pile at the beginning of every turn after you use Han Solo's ability, because there's going to be some ways to get back those cards back into your hand. Also, most of the time in most decks, card advantage, which means the ability to draw additional card and have more cards than your opponent, is not a very big factor, because you're basically drawing 2 cards per turn, so it's very difficult to run out of cards in this game. But Han is pretty much the exception to that rule, because you're going to be spending cards accelerating yourself. You can run out of cards very quickly with Han, and this is the reason why we also value a lot the card that we're drawing, and we want to basically get back the cards that we want. So now let's talk a little bit about the choice of the base here. I decided to play Echo Base, which might be a very surprising choice for some of you, because if you've seen my tier list videos about base, Energy Conversion Lab is by far the best base in the game. But Han Solo is probably the only deck in the metagame that actually does not really benefit very much from Echo Base Defender, and would rather from Energy Conversion Lab, and would rather be playing Echo Base. And the reason for this is simply because most of the cards that we have do not really benefit from getting ambushed. So if I'm trying to kind of run down most of the cards here, basically ambush is really good on units that don't have an immediate impact on the game and have relatively high attack value. or have a specific benefit from being able to attack right away because they have some sort of on-attack trigger ability. And so for us, we have cards. Most of the cards are really small cards, like Battlefield Marines don't really benefit so much from the ambush. Admiral Akbar, very low attack value, doesn't really benefit so much from the ambush. Echo-based Defender is quite good with Energy Conversion Lab, but it does have Sentinel, so it does have an immediate impact on the game, so it doesn't really need it that much. Million Falcon, basically if you are playing it with ambush, you're not going to get the ready ability, so it's a bit of a waste. Bright Hope, same, very low attack value, and Sentinel. And then Chewbacca, same, very low attack value, Sentinel. Rogue Squadron Skirmishers already has ambush, and then everything else we have costs more than 6, so cannot be used for Energy Conversion Lab. So simply this deck doesn't really benefit very much from Energy Conversion Lab, and in this case we'll rather have the 5 extra HP. I'm sure there's going to be future in the set, there's going to be new card being released that's going to make Energy Conversion Lab worth it for Han Solo, but for now, as of now, in my opinion, I would rather be playing the Echo base. So now that we've talked about the basic of the deck, let's go over the different cards that we're playing, going from the cheapest to the most expensive one. And first we're going to talk about the card that we are meant to be playing on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4. So first of all, we're going to talk about Greedo. So Greedo is, in my opinion, the best one-drop in the game. Simply just an excellent card that is going to be able to trade with most 2-drops. I like Greedo because I never feel bad playing a Greedo on turn 1, even though I don't spend the other resources. I don't feel bad at all, even though technically you could be using Han Solo's ability to play a 2-drop alongside Greedo right away from turn 1. But this play can be a bit risky sometimes because you are basically emptying your hand, and that's something that can be very dangerous to do if you're playing Han. So be careful when you're going for a play like this. But basically, Greedo is just an excellent turn 1 play that's going to trade with most things. The reason why we're playing Greedo in this deck is because it can be very convenient with U-Wing Reinforcement. We're really trying to optimize U-Wing Reinforcement. So U-Wing Reinforcement allows us to place 7 card cost worth of units into play, and having a 1 cost card to fill the gap and to makes our U-Wing Reinforcement significantly better. So this is the main reason why Greedo is in this deck. But it's just a very solid turn 1 play that plays very well into U-Wing Reinforcement. Moving on, we got Battlefield Marine, which is an absolute auto-inclusion in any green-white deck. And obviously this deck is no exception, it's just an excellent turn 1 play that allows us to establish dominance in the early stage of the game and trade with the enemy 2/3s. Next we got Mon Mothma. So Mon Mothma is a great way to provide board presence, as well as without basically losing cards. And as I said, in this deck, you have to be very careful about your cards and what you play and how many cards is left in your hand. What is very strong about Mon Mothma is that the extra card you get can be converted into resources thanks to Han Solo's ability, and that's just something that is very solid to do. So if you're playing a passive game where your opponent is not putting too much pressure on you, you play a Mon Mothma, you establish some board presence, and you give yourself an extra card. There has to be a rebel, so sometimes you can miss with that ability, but more often than not you won't. I mean, in 95% of the case you won't, so the card is pretty reliable on that matter. So you search for top 5. Just a little tip for Mon Mothma: if you are sideboarding and you're removing some rebels out of your deck, consider sideboarding out the Mon Mothma as well, because she's going to become a little bit too unreliable at that point. Just a very solid card. It's also a 2-drop, so 2-drops are also important for another reason that I'll talk about later. But basically, it's going to be a way for us to establish board presence without losing cards. Next we got Leia Organa. So Leia Organa is not a card that is a real 2-drop, in the sense that it's not a card that we want to play on turn 1. It's a card that actually we want to resource most of the time in the early stage of the game. And then we'll find a way, using Zan's ability, we can place that card that we resourced earlier, place it in the discard pile, and then we can get it back into our hand using Ohm 1 and Rogue Squadron Skirmisher. It's an excellent card to get back from Ohm 1, comes to play, and it allows us to exhaust enemy expensive units. So this is an excellent tempo play, and the fact that it's a unit is very important for the deck. So it's just a really solid card, provides board presence, can be reanimated by Home 1, got back into your hand with Rock Skirmisher, and tap exhaust very expensive units. So just an excellent card in this deck. Next, we got a very odd card, which is Vanguard Ace, a card that you're probably never going to see in any other deck, at least in Spark of Rebellion. This card is absolute trash, but it is very powerful in combination with U-Wing Reinforcements. So the way that works is you play U-Wing Reinforcements, and with U-Wing you can get back up to 3 units from the top 10 card of your deck. So you're going to be placing, so if you play U-Wing and you place 3 cards, let's say you place an Echo Base Defender, a Battlefield Marine, you can also get a Vanguard Ace. And because you played 4 units, so U-Wing Reinforcement, the Battlefield Marine, and a Vanguard Ace, you played 3 units, that means the Vanguard Ace is going to be a 4/4 for 2 in space, which is very powerful. So this card is basically amazing with U-Wing Reinforcement, as long as we can find 2 other units to go alongside it. Even a 3/3 for 2 in space is really not bad at all. And obviously this card is basically trash in any other situation, but that's completely fine because we only play 1 copy of it, so that means we can, if we draw it, we can resource it. And if we didn't draw it, then we have significant chance to find it from U-Wing Reinforcement. So at the stage where we're going to be playing U-Wing Reinforcement, we're very likely to get, I would say, something along the lines of like 30 cards in our deck. That means that by playing U-Wing Reinforcement, you see the top 10 cards. That means you have 1 chance out of 3 to find the Vanguard Ace, which is pretty good odds for a card that only takes 1 space in the entire deck. So very worth it to have this card as a one-of in the deck. So next we're going to move into the 3 drops. So card that we can be playing on turn 2. Sometimes we can also play them on turn 1. So Admiral Ackbar is another card that is very ideal for the deck, comes into play as an immediate impact, allows us to kill small things. If we played something, we play mostly ground units, so we're mostly going to be using this to shoot down ground units, and then it's going to provide a body that's going to restore us. It's an excellent card to bring back from Home 1. If you're playing Home 1, you can bring back Admiral Ackbar, and once again, shoot down, kill something else. And it's an excellent card, once again, with U-Wing Reinforcements. You find 3 units from there. One of them can be Ackbar, comes into play and shoot something. And even with an empty board, you can shoot something where you can deal up to 3 damage. You find 3 ground units, you can deal 3 damage. It's very good. Next, we got Echo Base Defender. Kind of an auto-include once again on all the green-white deck. Just a great card, great stats, great ability. And a great toolbox card to get from U-Wing Reinforcement and Home 1. So it's a great card in general, and I think it's even better in this deck than it is in other decks. You also have the option to play it on turn 1 if you want. If you manage to use if you use Han's ability on turn 1. Next we got Resupply. So this is a Ram deck, so obviously we want to have some Ram cards, and the only Ram cards available to the Rebels is Resupply. One of the best cards in the game in my opinion. So what I said about earlier about the combo into going into 7 resources on turn 4, well, you can do this on turn 3 if you have Resupply. So you go turn 1 any 2 drops, turn 2 Resupply, turn 3 use Han's ability, then summon Han and then attack with Han. That's 7 resources, and you can play your Han solos on turn 3. So I think that's it. That's I'm not saying bullshit. Yeah. So it's just a very strong. It's a very strong combo. Basically, Resupply is just an excellent card in the deck. Also, Resupply can be played on turn 1, which would allow you to play a 4-drop on turn 2, which is very nice. Obviously, this will cost you a card, but still very powerful. You can even, if you play Han's twice in a row, you could even play a 5 cards on turn 3, which is just 5 cards on turn 2, sorry, which is pretty absurd. So this is kind of this resource cheating that this deck is very famous for, and Resupply helps with this tremendously. Next we got a Millennium Falcon. So Millennium Falcon is doesn't sound like a great card in a ramp deck, simply because you're going to be playing this early, and then you have to play the Falcon tax and the Falcon tax is going to be very annoying because it will prevent you from playing more expensive cards. But the reason why we're playing Falcon is for 3 reasons. The first reason is that the way the Falcon ability works is that you have to pay the resources when you ready your cards. And when you ready your card, you're still gonna have the temporary resources that you got from the turn after, because you only defeat that resources at the start of the next action phase. That means that you can pay with the Falcon tax with the resource that you place on the turn before. And that means that you basically get the Falcon every time you play a Han's ability. You basically can pay for Falcon for free, and that's basically how it works. So that's pretty amazing, and it makes Falcon a lot stronger. So Falcon basically is going to have 2 roles in the deck. The first role is going to be a spaceboard stabilizer. If your opponent is very aggressive and try to attack us in space, we can play the Falcon, attack, kill the space units, and then put some pressure in space. The other way to use Falcon is as a finisher, where you can play it late in the game, play thanks to Ohm-1 or with Ewing Reinforcement, or just by himself, and just deal some extra damage to the base. It's also a card that we're going to be resourcing relatively aggressively, because as I said, we prefer to find this card into the later stage of the game, especially if we're not using Zan's ability. And then we can basically reanimate it with the Ohm-1. That's basically how we like to play it. So it's just an amazing card, combines great with Ewing Reinforcement, combines great with Ohm-1, and combines great with Han Solo's ability, and just an excellent card in this deck. But be careful don't play it early if you don't have the intention of using Zan's ability. Don't play this card early, because having to pay the Falcon tax early on in the game can really damage your game plan. So don't play that. Be careful when you play Falcon early in the game. But it's an excellent card. Next we got Bright Hope. So obviously we are playing a deck that can be a little bit slow in the beginning of the game, at least sometimes can be relatively proactive and not super reactive, and sometimes we need to stabilize the space arena. Bright Hope is just the best tool for that. Also the ability to bring back a friendly non-leader ground units to draw a card is very strong in this deck, because we have tons of very cheap units that so we can bring back, let's say, a Greedo into hand and then replay that Greedo, we just draw a card for 1 resources, which is nice. For this deck it's nice. Or you can bring back a Mon Mothma, draw a card and replay Mon Mothma, use Mon Mothma's ability again, bring back a Leia back into your hand, draw a card, bring back a Backbar into your hand, draw a card, that kind of thing. So it's not something we're going to be using all the time, but it's something that we're going to be using fairly often, and allows us to basically just get more value out of the Bright Hope. It's just an excellent card in this deck. Next we got Traitorous. So Traitorous is one of my favorite mono green card. It is, in my opinion, very powerful, especially if you can play it early on. And we can do this with we can play this card 1 turn, even sometimes 2 turn earlier than normal. And take control over a 3-drops, and that can be extremely powerful in some situations. So it's a card that your opponent is going to have to respect. And because it is the only upgrade that we're running in the deck, if our opponent is running anti-upgrade, it's going to be only for Traitorous, and we might actually sideboard out the Traitorous in those matchups where we expect the opponent to have some anti-upgrade, and then he's basically left with some anti-upgrade that don't do anything. So Traitorous is just an extremely powerful card that can completely swing games in our favor. So really a great card for that type of deck that is ramping, especially when you can play Traitorous earlier in the game. It's just an extremely impactful card. That allows us to get rid of a threat, get this threat on our side, and more often than not this threat is going to be ready, which is just extremely impactful. Next we got Chewbacca. So Chewbacca is a 2-off in the deck when we need a relatively large sentinel to block the ground arena. His ability can be very powerful if your opponent doesn't have the right tool to deal with it. So it's definitely one of the most, I would say, one of the slots that I'm the least confident about. This is definitely one of these cards which I'm kind of like still thinking through what are my different options. And so far as I've been testing, Chewbacca has been my favorite option. But it is not something that is an auto included in this deck. You can definitely could be playing something else in that slot. Next we got Rogue Squadron Skirmisher. So Rogue Squadron Skirmisher does a lot of things for us for the deck. First of all, is relatively a large unit that can come into play, kill something, and most likely will stay alive after ambushing that unit. It also brings back a card from our discard pile that costs 2 or less and put it back into our hand, which is something we can put 2 drops in the discard pile very easily in this deck, either by having this unit being killed, or either because we've previously played that, put that card in the discard pile using the Han Solo's ability. So it's just we're very likely to find that 2-drop, and then getting back that 2-drop is great because this 2-drop can either be played or be converted into our resources using Han Solo. So this card just does everything great for Han Solo's ability. It is card advantage, it is immediate impact. It is expensive, but with Han we have the ability to play this relatively early on. So as you know, with the Han Solo combo we can jump directly from 5 resources to 7 resources because we can 5, use Han's ability, play Han, attack with Han, and then we get 7 resources. But sometimes when that happens, so we use Han's ability, get an extra resources, summon Han, and then sometimes our opponent can deal with Han, can exhaust the Han, or can disturb our combo. And if that happens, having access to Rogue Squadron Skirmisher as a backup option is just an excellent thing to do. So just a really good card in this deck. Next we got, of course, the star of the deck, the best card in the deck, and that is U-Wing Reinforcements. This card is so good in this deck on so many levels. First of all, it costs 7, which is the ideal cost for this deck because, as I said, you can jump directly from 5 to 7 with Han. We can play this card 2 turns earlier than normal, extremely consistently, and we can play this card even 3 turns earlier, even more, also relatively consistently if we play the resupply. So this card is absolutely disgusting if it's played so early in the game. So this allows us to search for 7 or less worth of resources a unit in play. Our deck is mostly made out of units, so it's very consistent. It's going to give us a lot of different options of different cards we can play. And we have a toolbox of a large toolbox of different cards we can play. We want to exhaust something that is very large, we can get a Leia. We want to kill something small, we can grab an Akbar. We want to block the ground arena, we can play Ego Base Defender or Chewbacca. We want to block the space arena, we can play Bright Hope. We want to kill something right away, we can Rogue Squadron Skirmisher or even Han Solo. And obviously most of the time we're going to be trying to find 3 different units. It's usually more powerful to find 3 units that are worth 7 in total than grabbing one big unit like Han Solo that is worth 7, because in this case you could just play Han Solo. And I think this card, it's stronger if you grab 3 different units, but obviously you're going to be playing with what you find. But since you're digging up to 10 cards, you're often going to have a lot of different options to choose from. So yeah, so the most common pile that we usually do with this is going to be something like a 3-drop plus 2 2-drops. So Echo Base Defender, Battlefield Marine, Mon Mothma, Akbar, Battlefield Marine, Mon Mothma, or it could be something like a 5-drop and a 2-drop with Chewbacca plus a Battlefield Marine, a 6-drop and a 1-drop with Greedo plus Rogue Squadron Skirmisher, 2 3-drops plus a 1-drop with Greedo. So you see that having the Greedo in the deck really allows us to do a variety of different piles that are very, very powerful. Another 7-drop that is also excellent in this deck, it is obviously Han Solo. So Han Solo comes into play. Han Solo, Reluctant Hero, comes into play, kills immediate impact on the game, kills something, and does not take any damage back when he kills that thing. It just a huge amount of direct immediate impact on the board, huge board presence, relatively difficult to kill with its 6 HP, and especially since it doesn't take any damage when he kills stuff. And if it's not dealt with, it can be also a huge threat on the base because he had 6 attacks. So I think my main complaint with Han Solo is like he doesn't kill Boba Fett because he only has 6 attack. But other than this, it's an absolute great card. Once again, that you can play 2 turns earlier, sometimes even 3 turns earlier in this deck. So just an amazing card. And of course, for those who are not aware, yes, you're allowed to have Han Solo as a leader and Han Solo as a unit side by side into play. That is completely allowed by the rules. Last but not least, on the most expensive card in the deck, it is the Home One. So Home One is an incredible card in this deck because we're always going to have something in the discard pile to get back from home 1 because we are filling our discard pile using Han Solo's ability. So comes into play, bring an heroic unit that costs play a heroic unit from your discard pile and it costs 3 less. Most of the time we're gonna be playing this on curve at 8 resources. Once again, we can play this card 2 turns and sometimes 3 turns earlier using Han's ability. So if you want to do the same combo that we did with Han Solo's and U-Wing Reinforcement with 1 turn later, you just have to wait 1 more turn before summoning Han Solo. So in this case, it can be worth it to delay the deployment of Han so you can have the double extra resources with Han and play this card 2 turns earlier. And then obviously all of the units get restored and we get to bring back a unit to play. Most likely what we're going to bring back is either going to be an Echo-based defender to block the ground arena if we're under pressure, or if we want to put more pressure, we can bring back a Millennium Falcon. Obviously, we also like to bring back Leia or even sometimes Akbar. All those are also very solid options. If we play the Home 1 for 9 instead of 8, we can bring back a Bright Hope to block the space arena as well and to protect our own Home 1. That's also a very good option that we do very often. So Home 1 is just an absolute amazing card. Immediate impact on the game and very, very powerful if left alive. So now that we talked about the card that we want to play on curve, now let's talk about the card that are a bit more situational that we're going to be playing depending on the circumstances. There's 2 cards that belongs to that category. The first one is Surprise Strike. So Surprise Strike, in my opinion, is the best cunning card in the game and an auto include in any cunning deck. And this card is incredible as either a card that allows you to kill things that are much larger than you. So for example, you got an Echo-based defender, you play Surprise Strike, you can kill a Boba, which is just incredible. So it can be used for that, but obviously it also can be used as a finisher. This deck can very much take the aggro stance if it wants to. It has loads of units, it has card like Millennium Falcon that can attack right when it comes into play. So obviously you can very much take an aggro stance and put the pressure on the opponent. And in this context, Surprise Strike is just an excellent finisher. Next, we got Waylay. Waylay is going to be our kind of like answer catch-all. Once again, it's all about the tempo advantage that we get from the extra resources from Han. And if we can waylay an expensive unit from the opponent and buy ourselves even more time, it's just incredibly impactful. Waylay is going to be our super flexible answers to whatever our opponent is doing. So now that we talked about the main deck, let's talk a little bit about the sideboard. So as you know, in Star Wars Unlimited, if you're playing in competitive play, when you play, the first game is going to be playing without sideboard, and then on game 2 and on game 3, presumably if there is one, you're going to be able to swap cards from your main deck into your and your sideboard. So you allow 10 cards in your sideboard, and we're going to have a different sideboard plan depending on what we're playing against. This allows us to compensate the weaknesses of the deck against or try to hate on specific matchups and help us against the most popular decks in the game. So on the sideboard options, we're playing 3 Yularen. The Yularen is mostly going to be a card that we're going to be using against aggro in order to heal damage on our base. This is something that is very effective. Aggro players obviously are all going to be focusing on destroying our base as quickly as possible. Playing a 30 HP base really helps a lot in those matchups, but Yularen is a great card to get to restore. So Yularen is specifically good in this deck because we do play a lot of green units. Actually, almost every unit in our deck is going to be green, except Falcon and Han Solo's, and then Greedo, Chewbacca are not, but I would say the vast majority, but everything else is going to be green. So that means that Yularen is going to heal us a fair bit of HP every game. The second thing that I really like in this deck is the fact that Yularen really plays extremely well with U-Wing Reinforcements. So you play U-Wing Reinforcements, as I said, you can search up to 3 units. So if you're searching 2 green units plus Yularen, so let's say you get a Battlefield Marine, Yularen, and Echo-based Defender, you can basically play Yularen first, then play Battlefield Marine, then play Echo-based Defenders, and you've effectively won 3 HP. Because Yularen will heal for the Yularen itself, and then Marine heal again, Echo-based Defender heal again. So it's very easy to do. So that means that all of our U-Wing reinforcement is going to restore a bunch of HP, which is so helpful against aggro. So excellent card for this. Next, we are siding in 3 copies of Spark of Rebellion. So Spark of Rebellion has 2 purposes in the sideboard. The first one is to deal against the Boba decks. So notably the deck that do play cards like No Good to Me Dead. Those cards are extremely strong against Han Solo, so we want to get rid of them. It's also very strong against very late game focused deck, like for example, so decks that have that are very powerful late games. So then we can play Spark of Rebellion, and we can get rid of their expensive cards. And in the late game, if their expensive card have been discarded, and we have our expensive cards, we're gonna win the game because we're gonna have our bombs and they're not gonna have theirs. So it's also very strong in the sort of super late game focus matchup. It's also a really good answer to Super Laser Blast, which is a very powerful card against us, because Super Laser Blast deals with the board and our deck is all about having ball presence. So obviously very helpful in those situations as well. Then we got 3 copies of Reinforcement Walker, which also has 2 purposes. The first purpose is against aggro. We're going to be siding out the Ohm 1 and put the Reinforcement Walker instead. So Ohm 1 technically can restore us a lot of HP over time because it gives Restore 1 to all of our units. But realistically speaking, by the time you play the Ohm 1, the game is almost going to be over and you're not going to restore enough HP fast enough for you to really be able to benefit from the Ohm 1. Reinforcement Walker is slightly better in that sense because it comes into play and heal you 3 right away. And against aggro, it's actually more helpful than having Restore. Because it's an immediate healing. And as I said, in this deck you can play that Reinforcement card 2 turns, sometimes even 3 turns earlier. So the fact that it costs 8 is not a deal breaker against aggro. The second matchup in which we want to have a Reinforcement Walker is obviously against the control matchup, where we're going to be wanting Reinforcement Walker on top of the Ohm 1. We're playing both Reinforcement Walker Ohm 1 just to make our late game even better. Next, we got Change of Heart. So we have 1 copy of Change of Heart in a sideboard, and this card is mostly to mess up with our opponent head. The way that works is that it's the kind of card that can be extremely powerful if your opponent does not expect it, and in very specific situation against specific decks. So it's mostly going to be played against very late game decks, once again, very controlling matchups. And just having 1 of this card into our decks is going to be forcing our opponent to respect the options that we could play Change of Heart, and that can really mess with our opponent's opponent hand. Just having 1 random copy of that card into the sideboard that could make it into main deck, and like, oh, my opponent does he have it? Does he not have it? This could be like very dangerous. So yeah, that's the 1 copy of Change of Heart. And that's it. So we finished with the full deck. So now, just to give you like a few ideas about what I think about the deck in general. So it is my favorite deck to play. It's, I think, a very fun deck. It really makes you feel like you're playing at like Han, where you are basically improvising as you go. It's a deck that really rewards players who have the spirit of being able to improvise and adapt to the situation, because it's a mid-range deck that can take an aggro stance or a control stance depending on the situation. It's also always feel like you are playing, you are improvising as you go. You are basically always playing with the limits when you're spending Han Solo's ability to resource cards, and you only have a few cards in hand, and you're always playing with the absolute limits and hope everything goes fine. It really makes you feel like you are Han Solo when you're playing this deck. It's just an extremely fun deck to play with, and it's extremely skill intensive. It requires very deep knowledge of what you're playing against, what are you capable of doing, and it's just a very fun deck to play with. So I hope I'll be able to put this deck together soon enough and show you some real life gameplay. But yeah, so now the second question is, how competitive is this deck? So in my opinion, this deck is pretty competitive, especially if you know how to play it properly and you have a good knowledge of the meta. With that being said, it has a very big weakness, and is that it has a relatively bad matchup against Boba Fett. And the problem is that Basically, Boba Fett very efficiently can prevent Han from pulling off his combo by playing No Good to Be Dead on Han Solo when he comes into play, and that's something that is very, very powerful. And obviously, Boba Fett being the most popular and most powerful deck in the game, it is a very big weakness. But other than this, it's a deck that I think can beat anything. It plays relatively well into aggro, and it can definitely also play relatively well into control. So if you enjoy the deck and you're willing to take up the challenge, it's a deck that I would recommend. Anyway, I hope you guys like this very first deck tech videos, and hopefully I'll make some more, and see you around.